Hello and welcome back to another video on this channel. Today we're going to be talking about the art of disagreement. Essentially all the beauty, the interest and the nature of disagreement when we're interacting with others. Essentially we're going to be covering the theme of disagreement from three different perspectives. First of all, why do we disagree with each other? The importance of disagreement. And finally, how we should disagree with others. And of course, the first two seem a bit more self-explanatory, but of course, I want to spend the most time on the last one, how we should disagree, because it really is a very important thing, and it really saddens me that a lot of us, even though we do have disagreements, I see so many people in my generation and people on the internet are able to disagree but just don't express their disagreement in a positive way, and that's something which is very unfortunate, something which saddens me a lot, and something that I think we really need to do when we're moving on and moving forward as a society. So first of all, before we get into this, I'd like to remind you that if you enjoy this content, make sure to like and subscribe. Really means a lot to me, really helps this channel grow. So without further ado, let us get right into it and talk about why do we disagree. And this is a very simple thing. Two people have different opinions, different ideas, different thoughts about a single topic, and as a result, a disagreement arises, a discussion arises. For example, maybe I think that God exists and an atheist thinks that God doesn't exist. Maybe I think that socialism is a very harmful concept, and then someone else who I meet, maybe on the far left, says socialism is something which we should be pursuing in the government or in the country. Then you talk about, well, why is it good? Why is it not good? What are the benefits and downsides to each individual concept? The belief in God, the belief in charity, belief in whatever concept you're discussing about. There's always going to be someone which says, yes, this is true or this is not true. Is this good? Is this beneficial? Or is it harmful for our lives? And in every single circumstance, whether it is, as I've said, in belief of God or any truth statements, there'll always be a potential or a chance for disagreement. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's really nice to have disagreement because it allows for different people to have discussion, and even though they may fall on two sides of the scale, at least they have a unity in the idea that there is something at the heart of which they're working towards. They hold an opinion, they hold a stance on a certain topic. And that's why I think Heidegger says very clearly when he says, well, man or humans are the being which can stand upon their own being. It's the idea that humans are able to take a stance in their own understanding, their own nature as beings in the world. They're able to make a stance and understanding of that and hold a stance. And of course that this is a bit of a slightly different idea, but of course there's still that fundamental concept that we're able to make a stand and really make a charge for what we believe in. And that's really why we have disagreements, is because we believe that it's important to make a stand and stand up for ourselves as who we think we are, and also how we interact with the world. And that is very, very important. Now, not only is it very important in your own personal life not to be a pushover and to stand on your opinions, even if people disagree with you, causing disagreement, it's also very important in the pursuit of the truth or the development of society. Now, of course, you could say, is the pursuit of the truth necessarily desirable? That's for another video, and we're not really going to go into that today, because I've recently come across a lot of dialogues about the importance and the role of the truth and the development of society, and it doesn't appear, at least to me, that those are one and the same thing. However, even just as the development of society, if we're only looking at that, disagreement is very important, because of course in order to go forward you must at the same time understand that why you're going in one direction instead of the other. And oftentimes in science, in philosophy, in discussion, in meetings, you have one person saying, well, this is my proposal, this is the idea going forward, and someone say, well, no, that's not very correct. And you might say, well, oh, yep, that is true, that disagreement provides some points. As a result, when you move away from that point and say, well, yes, let's modify it a bit to move in a slightly different direction. Or maybe you're like, well, person A in the meeting says, yes, we should go forward, and then someone else says, no, that's very dangerous, that has harmful effects. Then you change from A to B and say, well, yes, let's not do that. And as a result, disagreements are very, very helpful, either on the smaller scale organizations or as a society as a whole. For example, maybe some science, someone would say, well, evolution it's just natural selection, and it's only about survival of the fittest. And someone might say, well, oh, there's maybe some other view, and they might have a disagreement about that to kind of refine your view about evolution or refine your view about cosmology. So there's definitely a lot of different ways disagreement occurs, and it's very important for us to recognize the importance of this disagreement. Even if someone seems to have an absurdly crazy view, you should at least take into consideration that maybe there is some truth behind what they're saying, and maybe as a result you're able to look at that and say, well, yes, maybe I can use some of that view to kind of change my views as well, so I can develop as a person and kind of develop society as a whole through disagreement. And in most situations, progress is found through disagreement. It's through that disagreement, through that dialogue, through that discussion, where we find the best views, the best ideas. And that is very, very important. But of course, we all know that disagreement has its downsides. And what I mean that is that it can be used and expressed in a very wrong way. We all know, like, some people on the internet who, when they disagree with someone, just hit them with insults and don't provide anything constructive. For example, in some of my recent videos, I look at that in the comments, I'm like, well, this guy just says, like, oh, I don't like who you are as a person. I'm like, well, so what? I really don't care if you don't like who I am. Like, I mean, hate me all you want, it doesn't really matter, right? But, like, you haven't disagreed with actually anything. Although, of course, they say they disagree. They're like, oh, you don't have a point. I'm like, well, so what? You don't think I have a point then? Like, exactly where does that follow from? There's all these experiences or these times where, like, you could say that you disagree with someone, but unless you actually interact with them or interact with that disagreement in a positive way, there's absolutely no point in discussion. That's why you could see a lot of when I interact with my comments, like, if someone doesn't raise a point in their comment or actually a genuine disagreement and they just say, oh, I disagree with you, I either not respond to it or I just respond in a quite a parodying way of their comment, because there's no actual substance in their argument which you could wrestle or disagree upon or interact with. And that's brings us to our next point about how we are meant to disagree, because we clearly know that there's so many ways of disagreement which aren't very helpful. Now, the first way, and I'll make kind of like a 4-way plan of disagreement, perhaps. I'm not sure about add another 5 or take away 1 to make it a 3-way plan, but it's essentially something which I think is very important. First of all is recognize the essence of what you disagree with. Because a lot of times in a meeting, we hear someone say something, we're like, that's wrong. But then you don't really understand exactly what the person said. You're like, well, yeah, he said something like this, it doesn't feel right. But then, well, the first thing you should do is not just immediately disagree with them, but make sure you actually understand what they're saying. Because a lot of times I've realized, especially if I'm on the prefect team, someone would say this, someone else would say they disagree, and then after they talk about it, they realize that they agreed with them the entire time. It's just their expression, their use of phraseology, use of language might have been a bit different. So the first thing you have to do when you disagree with them is really understand exactly what they're saying. Really understand the concepts that they're putting forward. What are they trying to work towards? And that's the first step that you take. After that, after you understand what they're saying, provide some arguments, provide some reason for why you disagree. It's all well and good to say, well, I disagree with you, but unless you provide some good substantive evidence to actually say that, well, there's no point in saying it in the first place, because then you could just be completely ignored. You disagree with me, so what? It doesn't really matter. I mean, you better provide some arguments to back it up. You can't just say, I disagree with you, and then expect the other person to do absolutely nothing or do everything with it. You have to also interact with the arguments and say, well, this argument is wrong, this premise is wrong because of these reasons, or this premise is correct because of these reasons, but it could be refined because of these reasons. And that's very important. You have to provide reasons for your disagreement, and that's something which you have to use very, very well. Number 3, you have to be respectful. When you're interacting with someone, you have to treat them with respect and their ideas with respect as well. I was having a discussion with someone else the other day, and I was like, well, oh, I can disrespect someone's ideas without disrespecting the person. Well, that's not exactly what you should do when you're disagreeing with someone. The first thing you do is to treat everyone's ideas with respect. You might say, well, what about a really, really crazy idea? To treat an idea with respect is to treat it as a solid viewpoint and a reasonable viewpoint, and then disagree with it first, or first treat it as a decent viewpoint and then find problems with it. You should never go into a disagreement saying, well, prima facie that is wrong, or you can say that, but you should at least treat it with some decency to say, well, let us treat this as a serious viewpoint. Of course, if they're presenting it as a joke, then, well, it's a completely different discussion. But if they present a viewpoint with reason, then you have to treat it with respect. You shouldn't strawman it. You shouldn't create an ad hominem attack. And that's all about treating the argument with respect. Yes, the argument may be very extreme, maybe like a Nazi viewpoint about disrespecting some minority or something like that. That's a crazy viewpoint, and you can definitely find problems with it. But that doesn't mean you should then go and strawman the argument, treat it with disrespect, and then add your disagreement towards that disrespected argument, because then it defeats the point of interacting with such a horrid viewpoint. Like, if someone is a neo-Nazi or something like that, you should then say, well, your argument is very serious, it's a very serious problem, find the problems with it, and then provide your disagreement. Don't just like straw man their point, because then they will just think, well, alright, you've just straw man my point, I can still continue being whatever I am right now, and that would not change my opinion. So it's very important that you do respect the ideas, not only the person, and then that allows you to have a positive dialogue and potentially change their opinion, because at the end of the day, even if someone holds a very extreme view, you still have to treat them with respect, and the aim really of this disagreement is that you can both move together towards a certain direction to develop yourselves, to develop your walk in the world. And that is the important thing, and in order to do that, the only way you can do that is to treat the argument with respect. Now finally, don't be afraid to raise that disagreement. Don't be afraid to disagree with someone. If someone says something in the meeting, don't stay silent. If it doesn't sit well with you, then please say it. You should be able to confront other people and not be afraid of it, especially when we live in a free world like either in Hong Kong or in the United States. You have that freedom of speech, which is very, very important. If someone disagrees with you, say it. If you disagree with someone, say it. Don't stay silent, especially in a meeting scenario. If you're in a meeting and then someone gives their proposal and you don't say anything, you can't expect them to know that you disagree with them. And when they do send off that proposal, oftentimes on behalf of the prefect team or on behalf of the team, and because they haven't heard any disagreements, then you'll feel bad because you might feel misrepresented, even though you haven't made a stand. You should say out, or you should speak out when you feel that someone else is saying something you disagree with. Unless, and if you don't speak out, then you should expect for them to just say it's on behalf of yourself as well, even if you don't agree with it. So it's very important for us to be able to speak out when we disagree, because if you don't speak out, then you're not going to move anywhere. And as a result, speaking out is the most important thing, I think. Is first of all, of course, you have to have those 3 tips I've said before. The final thing really is to speak out, because if you don't speak out and you stay silent, then you cannot expect anyone else to know that you disagree with them. And as an unfortunate situation is that you will feel that you've been oppressed, or you feel that you have not been able to express yourself, which is definitely a very bad feeling that you feel, and you should try to move away from it. So essentially, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed kind of the discussion about why we disagree, why the importance of disagreement, but more importantly, learned a bit from like how we should disagree. If you're doing that, that's great. Continue disagreeing in a respectful way. If you haven't been doing it, or you want some self-reflection or understand a bit more about how you could disagree in a more positive way, feel free to let me know. I'll help you in the comments below. I'll love to have that disagreement or that discussion with you. And of course, when we're discussing or interacting with others, especially on the internet, it's very, very important that we bear these tips in mind so that we can present ourselves and our ideas in a respectful manner, so that we can all move towards the truth, whether you agree, disagree, or whatever. It's very important that we move towards the truth or the development of ourselves in the world together. So that is ultimately the goal, and in order to do that, in order to move towards that goal, it's very, very important that we first start off in a very, very good way of disagreement. Now, finally, before we end off this video, I'd like to remind you, or I'd like to let you know that I have indeed changed the name of this series from A Civilian's Handbook to Being in the World. So I think that Being in the World perhaps hits the nail on the head a bit more. These videos are indeed to help you develop as a being, as a human being in the world, to interact with ideas, concepts, and meaning in a more profound way. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you enjoy this content, make sure to like and subscribe. It really means a lot to me, really helps this channel grow. Stay safe, my friends. See you soon. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. I'll see you next one.